On June 4th, 2025, the Ontario Conservative government passed Bill 5, a controversial omnibus bill that is designed to accelerate building, boost the economy, and respond to tariffs from the US. Called the Protect Ontario by Unleashing Our Economy Act, the bill has been heavily criticized for gutting environmental protections and Indigenous rights. But while Indigenous rights and the environment have dominated the conversation around Bill 5, they may simply be a smokescreen that distracts from other serious issues. So what is in Bill 5? And will it truly unleash Ontario's economy? And if it does, at what cost? According to the Ford government, the purpose of Bill 5 is to ward off uncertainty around Trump's tariffs by allowing Ontario to build important infrastructure projects quickly. It's part of what the government alluded to in their throne speech back in April, which was the goal of eliminating a labyrinth of red tape that slows down new projects. The government also aimed to streamline environmental assessment processes. The largest and most consequential power granted by the bill is giving the government the power to designate an area as a special economic zone, where projects are exempt from provincial and municipal rules. There are no limits in the bill on the size, location, or identity of these areas, or the type of project being completed in the zone. There are also very few guidelines on what allows the government to declare an area to be one of these zones, and the government can do this without going through the legislature. Additionally, the government can choose a trusted company or individual to manage the project in that zone, which, for a government with a long history of favoring specific companies they have close ties to, is suspect at best. This essentially means that the government can allocate any area of the province as a special economic zone, where environmental protections and rules do not apply, and build whatever they want there, without public consultation or environmental assessments. When it comes to Doug Ford's government, the vagueness of Bill 5 is particularly ominous to environmental groups and municipalities. Ford has a tendency to exert his power over municipalities in controversial ways. He's done this on a massive scale with MZOs, as we covered in another video. Several municipalities have written to Ford, asking for clarification on whether these special economic zones would allow developers to override sustainable growth and development laws and allow the province to overreach, removing decision-making power from local governments. The main area the government has targeted as a special economic zone is the Ring of Fire in northern Ontario, an area of land with a lot of mining potential, but that is also protected by Treaty 9. Initially, the government intended to go forward in this region without Indigenous consultation, but after intense public backlash have decided to add the duty to consult to the bill in an amendment. Many First Nation communities have threatened to sue over the bill. The Ring of Fire, while rich in minerals, is an important location both for Indigenous communities and for the environment. The peatlands of the Ring of Fire are estimated to sequester 35 billion tons of carbon. Development of the Ring of Fire is likely to reverse that process, turning those lands from a carbon sink to a carbon emitter. Restoration technology has advanced significantly and can restore peatlands to some extent, but Bill 5 removes the accountability on corporations to carry out that restoration. The bill also removes a 2019 law that gave corporations the option to pay into a sustainable development fund rather than do the restoration themselves. The money paid into that fund, millions of dollars, has never been put towards any kind of conservation or restoration activities, although the government says it will still use the money for that purpose. At the same time, many First Nations communities in that region live in extreme poverty and are in favor of development, in order to bring some kind of economic prosperity on their traditional lands, which creates a difficult situation. The Ontario government has committed to consulting, but if they're given the go-ahead, they will likely develop the Ring of Fire without proper environmental assessments. Mining projects have massive and far-reaching environmental impacts, even when proper assessments are conducted. But even if Bill 5 results in unacceptable environmental destruction, Ontario has thought of that too. Bill 5 protects Ontario against lawsuits, extending to anyone who works within one of the special economic zones, and including the Independent Electricity System Operator and Ontario Power Generation, both Crown corporations. Ontario has had the Endangered Species Act for 18 years. This very act has thwarted or slowed a number of Doug Ford's plans over the years, accounting for a number of delays around Highway 413. Bill 5 includes a replacement, called the Species Conservation Act. This new law takes the power away from scientists, the ones who study the plants and animals, and instead gives the power to the cabinet to decide which animals and plants are in need of protection, and removes the obligation on the government to report on or create recovery strategies for those species. The bill is supposedly an attempt to boost Ontario's economy in response to Trump's tariffs, but the two main projects initially mentioned in the bill have only tertiary connections to the tariffs. The first project is a dump in Chatham, Kent, which was approved for an environmental assessment in 2024 after residents demanded it. The bill exempts it from that assessment. Ontario exports about 1/3 of its waste to the US, and Ford says the disposal facility needs to be built quickly in case Trump suddenly decides the US won't take Ontario's waste anymore. The developers of the dump have donated around $200,000 to the Conservatives since Doug Ford came to power. The second project is the Eagle's Nest mine in the Ring of Fire, which is also exempted from an environmental assessment in the bill. The Neskantaga First Nation own the land where Eagle's Nest is proposed, and have said that the environmental assessment was the main channel for Indigenous consultation. The mine would be next to the Attawapiskat River, which is an important water system for that community. The Neskantaga First Nation has threatened to stop all attempts to fast-track the Ring of Fire without their consent. The connection between the Ring of Fire and Trump's tariffs is far more tenuous. That area of the province doesn't even have roads. Even assuming that Indigenous consultations go quickly, something which is doubtful considering the government's environmental approach, it will be years before those mines are up and running, long after Trump's second term has come to an end. And it wouldn't be a story about Doug Ford if it didn't come back to Ontario Place. Bill 5 specifically exempts Ontario Place projects from posting on the Environmental Registry of Ontario for public review, something that previously was a legal requirement. Just a few months prior, the province had posted plans for a sewage pipe that would pump wastewater from Ontario Place into Lake Ontario. They changed the plan after significant public outcry. Luckily for the government, they no longer have to inform the public about their plans, meaning they can dump sewage wherever they please. There's still a chance that the bill could be found unconstitutional in a federal court, although Ford has not committed on whether or not he would use the notwithstanding clause to save the bill if that were to happen. First Nations have said they would blockade roads, railways, and mines in protest, to which Ford responded casually, saying that lawbreakers would be dealt with appropriately. For all of Doug Ford's flaws, he is a great politician. He knows how to get the messaging right, which is why the focus of the public criticism of Bill 5 is on Indigenous rights and the environment, two issues that, while extremely important, are largely seen as partisan issues. They're a smokescreen that distract from another problem with Bill 5, labor laws. Bill 5's special economic zones do not simply sidestep laws around environmental protections. They allow employers to ignore labor laws as well. In theory, workers in a special economic zone would not be guaranteed the right to health and safety, a minimum wage, or employment protections. Even more extreme, although less likely, it removes protections around child labor, the right to refuse unsafe work, or meal breaks. All of this while protecting any employer working in a special economic zone from any legal recourse. Special economic zones are not a new idea. Countries around the world have used them throughout the 20th century, resulting in some huge success stories, at least from a corporate standpoint, as corporations thrive and investment dollars pour in. But investigations of special economic zones all over the world, in China, Cambodia, Ireland, Burma, Cuba, South Korea, etc., have found rampant worker exploitation, and even in cases where the government didn't explicitly allow SEZs to ignore labor rights, typically those rights were not adequately enforced. Across Asia, SEZs have to a large extent become places for migrant workers and refugees to be exploited. Yet, SEZs work. They bring investment. They turned Shenzhen and China into the Silicon Valley of hardware, have brought manufacturing from big companies to countries all over the world. The thing about Bill 5 is that it will probably work. Things will get built faster. Investment will flow into special economic zones. Infrastructure projects that have been stalled will get underway. At the same time, species will go extinct. Important and unique environments will be destroyed. First Nations will have their lands polluted. Developers will be awarded contracts based on who they know in the government without transparency or fair procurement processes. Workers will see the erosion of some of their most basic labor rights, moving closer to an American-style right-to-work system. Not to be too philosophical, but Bill 5 is at the heart of one of the fundamental trade-offs of a capitalist democracy. Do you want things built quickly, or do you want protections and a voice? You simply can't have both.